It's awkward. My name's Josiah Meldrum, and I've come down from Suffolk today, where we have big fields, and it's lovely to see your small fields full of grass. We have too few of those. And I am the co-founder of a business called Hodmedod, and Hodmedod works with UK farmers. We have a network of about 35 farmers, working mainly with pulse crops, so looking at revaluing those crops in the food system and in the farming system. And I think what's really interesting is why we did that and how that began. So I'm going to ask you as a warm-up, because it is just after coffee and it is the end of the day, and I know some people have raced to beat the rush hour traffic, and you're going to miss out on the best panel of the day, I think. So can I have a show of hands? Who here class themselves as a food producer? Food producers, that is fantastic. And do you know where your food goes? Do you know where the food that you produce goes? That is brilliant. That is a good sign. And how many of you are supplying into supermarkets? That is impressive. I think that would be very different in East Anglia. So that is really heartening. And of course, 96%, roughly, the numbers vary. There's a lot of discussion about that, of the food that is purchased in the UK comes out of supermarkets. That leaves us with 4% to mess around with at the side. And we've had some fantastic presentations today about the context of whatever you want to call it, the poly crisis, the meta crisis. I heard at the Oxford Real Farming Conference the crisis that we face around climate and biodiversity being described as interspecies genocide, that is harsh. and the context is bad. And then we've heard a lot about the practices that are being used to pull us through that. And that is so powerful and so optimistic. And it's absolutely fantastic to hear from farmers that are innovating, that are measuring, that are thinking, that are testing and trying different things and working with research scientists. And that is incredibly exciting. But none of that works unless we have a route to market that recognises the value of that work and recognises it consistently, not just as a special offer or a one-off or a little bit of the shelf section where we're going to promote a particular set of local farmers. Something that is part of the +% of the population is classed as urban now. That continued to rise even through COVID when we thought people were moving to live in the country again. Didn't really happen. Those people are very, very disconnected from where their food comes from. We have a responsibility for finding ways of reaching them with food that addresses all the crises we've heard about, and that is produced in the ways. We're going to talk about how it is that we begin to cut through with alternative routes to market that communicate those values, that communicate those practices, and bring extra economic return to the farm. It's been said repeatedly, there is no point in doing this unless it pays. That is really, really critical. And I'm hoping that what we're going to explore are the kind of relationships that build that change, because we need a cultural shift. We need a massive social transition that goes with that economic change that addresses the environmental problems. And I think our panel are going to amazingly offer solutions. We're going to have some discussions about what those solutions might look like as a panel, and I'm hoping that there will be questions from the floor, and we're going to leave enough time for a decent number of questions to talk about the opportunities, some of the barriers, and how we might overcome them. And I know Roddy in particular has some provocations around that, which I'm looking forward to hearing. So my panel are Fred Price from Githowny Farm in Somerset, Roddy Hall from just down the road, organic, mainly horticulture, but with some beef cattle, am I right? Yep. And turkeys, of course, yeah. Ian Warren from Philip Warren Butchers, farmers, butchers, and selling into London as well as locally. And then finally, Harriet Bell, who is regenerative farm systems works for Riverford and works with farmers. And I think the interesting thing about Harriet's position is she sort of represents what happens when farmers work together, or when there's an opportunity to market collectively, that there are other services and functions that can come with that. And Harriet is a representation of that. But we're going to kick off with Fred. And Fred is going to talk to us a little about his work with wheat and with cereals.
So far, so good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My first time at Rootstock. And no one gave me the memo that Rootstock was about evidence and stats. I have no evidence and no stats. I think what I do have is stories, though. And my story is not just about my story. It's about a kind of alternative food system story. And we're all people, and people relate to each other, I think, through stories. And we've heard a lot today about change and how change happens. And I think stats are important and evidence is important, but so are stories. They're the hook that often gets us on board with new ideas. And I've really speak from the heart when I say changing the farm also is about changing yourself. And so this is a really personal journey, I think, and stories are a great way of communicating that. Sorry. We're up. Okay. So the other thing I feel is that today has been a different kind of experience for me lately. And I've been really into the intensity of the talks, although it's kind of knackering, isn't it? But what I would say is that the talks have largely focused around what we can do on farm. And I have a little cheat, and that is change the rules, and then you don't have to work within the same parameters. And I think that's generally what we're doing here, is we're talking about changing the rules. So who are we? I'm the fall guy for Gothenburg Farm up here, telling the story, but the farm is so much more than me. It started in 2007, a farm partnership between me, mum and dad. My sister and brother-in-law have joined and run a butchery. My friend Rosie runs her bakery, Field Bakery. And a few years ago, Jess brought her cows here. Jess is here, so stick your hand up, Jess. You can be complete. There you go. That was a quick hand. The farm is really very different now than when I took on in 2007. The top left picture here is me in 2007 spraying oilseed rape. Really, a farm I inherited from my aunt that the business model was really entrenched and trapped in this commodity system of agriculture. That's a system of agriculture in which you don't control your price. And when you don't control your price, you have to have a laser-like focus on yield and scale, because it's about cost reduction per ton, cost reduction per acre. So this is what I mean by changing the rules. The farm today is about different people, different animals. It's a kind of lay farming system. We're in organic conversion. We've been farming without any external inputs apart from grass seed since 2018. We've got some intercropping and we've got some population weeds. Effectively, what I'm describing is like a personal transformation where in 2007, 2008, 9, 10, I was really doing everything possible to change everything apart from my own mentality. We were trying to manage all the variables and shift them in order to do X, Y, or Z. And that was forced on me by the sort of commodity system that I was trapped in. But actually, if you sidestep that and you change the rules, the opportunities are really are kind of opened up to you. And I would describe what we do now generally as a kind of more ecocentric kind of agriculture instead of an egocentric kind. And it's where we try and adapt our processes and fit into our parameters. And I think we got a sense today from so many of the talks is that making those changes can be really productive. This is not a cost-cutting exercise. There's something about this in the context of our panel is what I'm describing here is actually a really quite authentic story of change. Our farm is really very, very different to how it was in 2007. And that's really powerful and it's important because what we also require of the supply chain is adaptive processes. And if you have a really compelling story, then consumers are more inclined to change their behavior patterns. We might need them to think seasonally. We might need them to consider a higher price. We might need to get restaurants to think of whole carcasses rather than loins. We need bakers to widen the specification of their wheats. The last panel was just about to get stuck into that discussion, which was really exciting. And so capturing people's imaginations with a good, compelling story is actually amazing at kind of creating this intention within people to change and be adaptive, which kind of unleashes this direct route to market for a farmer and a grower. And of course, I'm not a marketing person, so a good story sells itself. The question, of course, is the lorry the right vehicle for that conversation? And evidently not. So what's the alternative? And these slides really capture where we've got to as a farm, which is a small food economy. And by small food economy, I mean a relational food system, a relational supply chain where friendships and trust are the kind of vehicles, they're the currency by which you tell these stories. And there's different ways. So the top right picture is down a Millie at White Ladies Market in Bristol selling pork. The bottom right is Rosie stood on the bale there, talking to her bakery customers on a farm walk. Here's me in the summer. I can't explain to you quite how incredible it is being stood in a field of wheat with the customers who are going to buy that wheat and use it next year. And we talk about intention. Can you imagine how they start the year with that first delivery, not with a reductive mindset of what's the specification, but how can I make this work in my system, in my business? And it's completely flipped on its head to the kind of relationships I had when I put Rob's lorry full of 29 tons of wheat or whatever and put the crap stuff at the back and the dry stuff at the front and gave him a sample bag that had been in the cooker the night before. People are laughing because it's true, we all do it, right? It's a completely race to the bottom system. So this is a small food system. But there's obviously a very specific context which has enabled me and the privilege of the farm being family-owned, half and half tenanted, that's enabled us to think really long-term about investing in spaces like the bakery and the butchery. So I'd say that's context-specific. And you may be finding that kind of inaccessible in your minds right now, but I'd ask you to try and be imaginative about what a relationship is. A relationship is also something that can be business to business. A relationship is something that can be regional, it can be international. So the next slide is a kind of great example of a regional network that we set up in 2018 called the Southwest Grain Network. So this could be risky, but is there anyone from the Southwest Grain Network in the room? Wow, look at this. 1, 2, 3. That's at least 1% of the audience. Well done. This is the Southwest Grain Network. As I say, it formed. It's actually basically a WhatsApp group of a community of farmers, millers, bakers, some consumers, some food writers, some activists. It's kind of like a cross-section of this room in a way, with perhaps slightly heavier on the bakery and processing side. And where we overlap is areas of mutual interest, of businesses that complement each other, and that's where our energies are focused. And we also overlap in the sense that we've developed a shared set of values as a network about how we see the food system and how we can kind of, not so much codify, but how we can put across our values and consent to a set of values as a group. And it's a very vibrant, emergent community. I've put the, whatever that thing is, there. And if you do that, you will get to the WhatsApp group. So please feel free to join and observe and contribute and be part of it. It's a completely emergent community. And I haven't got time to go through all the values we consented to about 4 years ago. But the first two seem really relevant. And what I've tried to describe so far is this idea that we're moving away from a commodity system of food production towards a human scale system where relationships and trust, friendships, this is the currency of an alternative system which enables you to communicate value and curate intention to have the adaptive processes in the supply chain. The second thing is about being caring and collaborative. And the kind of supply chain that I was involved in when I took on the farm was, and is increasingly, I think, looking from afar, a globalized, vertically integrated, consolidated, less diverse, even uniform supply chain, whether we're talking about pigs or poultry or grain or whatever. And that is about power and control. And as a producer, you're at the bottom, and we feel that, right? We're good at moaning about it too. But the point is that power is vertically integrated, and in an alternative route to market, this network embodies something where the power is distributed more horizontally. And that means that the risk is mitigated horizontally. It's a kind of decentralized, diverse, democratic. Ultimately, it's a kind of aggregated supply chain. So stop thinking of supply chains, if you can, as a kind of linear, top-down, about power, and start thinking as like a network about control and about where we can all intersect and interact and where we can build on and kind of hone in on the energy in positive directions. Did I want to say any more there? Probably. Okay, I also have been thinking long and hard about how to segue into talking about seed, because I'm a grain nerd, but this is a panel about supply chains, so cue slick segue. I think I mentioned about moaning, and You know that feeling when you pass your neighbour down the road and you wind down the window and you have a good old moan about everything, or you sit on the gate at Junction 24 and chat to someone who you haven't seen in a while. You know, it's tough. And we did that a bit in the first session, it's easy to moan because there's lots to moan about. And as a producer, I think and today's embodied a lot of these conversations, we seem to be wrapped up in the business of production about growing and farming, which I guess is obvious because that's our skill set. But just for a minute, imagine you as an individual, but more your business, your farm as a consumer. And all of a sudden, you realize that we do have power, we do have agency, and we do make choices. And in a way, we are kind of complicit in these big vertically integrated supply chains, and we can affect change. So what do I mean by that? Let's take seed as an example. Seed. The two biggest mergers of any kind, any business, in the last 10 years have been Bayer and Monsanto and ChemChina and Syngenta. That's a seed company being bought by an agrochemical company, a seed company being bought by an agrochemical company. So my question is how are we thinking about our seed choices as arable farmers? Are we thinking about our complicity in this big top-down vertically integrated supply chain? And are there alternatives, which is actually a much funner, safer place to inhabit? Yes, there are alternatives. So let's sidestep the recommended list, monocultural varieties with this kind of inbuilt obsolescence. We're in the southwest. I've heard Septoria mentioned on the last panel. Extace was brought out by KWS. KWS, by the way, have over 50% of the 21 varieties on the list this year, KWS varieties. If we want to talk about consolidation, it's everywhere. It's really everywhere. Extace came out with an 8 for Septoria. It's the highest rating Septoria variety. What an opportunity to reduce inputs. But because it's so one-dimensional genetically, you've created a massive selection pressure for the pathogen to evolve and sidestep it. And that's what we see year on year. So varieties, there's a high turnover. There's very few varieties that really last the course. And Extace, was grown every 6th field of wheat in the UK 2 years ago when it was launched, or 3 years ago. 15% of the market. And now it's probably grown less and less and less. Don't have the numbers, as I say. No stats, no evidence. A safe place to stand. So what's the alternative? Well, what about thinking about genetic diversity in our seed system? And I will bring this back to supply chains, don't panic. Josiah's looking at me nervously. Populations, diverse genetics in the same field. This is a field at home of YQ, which is a population wheat. Population wheats are bred in a very similar way to a pedigree wheat. We make crosses between desirable parents, but instead of selecting them to become pure lines over multiple generations, you just bulk up all the F1 generations and you grow them out. YQ, this field, there's maybe 500,000 different genotypes in one field. And the significance of having 500,000 genotypes in one field is that beyond a mixture of 3 or 4 lines, this field has adaptive evolutionary potential. In the first session, we were hearing about climate being a massive risk. Well, here's a really good mitigation strategy. YQ will get better year on year. Extace will break down and no longer be grown. So genetic diversity and unpacking that question about seed sovereignty and how we become custodians and how we generate this kind of material and how we share it, how we redesign our seed system in a way that's really suitable for the future adaptive potential that we need is a big question. And relating this back to the table that we're meant to be talking about, I feel like there is another segue to that, which is that a modern variety is defined by its uniformity. So genetic monoculture means that every plant in the field is identical. That's how you say Crusoe has that particular colour, or Skyfall has a particular discerning characteristic with the horned grain. Well, YQ doesn't do that. In fact, YQ grown in the southwest looks different to Suffolk, looks different to maybe even Gloucester. But that's exactly the point. So what happens is that you define a population by the place and the people which it's grown. So we're moving away from a system. Was that 1 minute warning? 1 minute too long or 1 minute too short? We're not sure. 1 minute left. So what I'm saying with YQ is it becomes defined by the people and the place, and so we're moving away from this commodified, unified, kind of homogenous product, and we've taken wheat, for goodness sake, and we've created a story around it, and that's incredibly powerful. So I think I'll stop talking now, and hopefully I've sparked some interesting questions that we can talk about later. Thanks so much for listening to me. It's a real privilege.
Thanks, Fred. I think that point about the human scale and the relationships that emerge through those interactions that enable a farmer to take some risks because they're supported by the customers, and it allows them to have those more complicated conversations about what's happening on the farm, but also that shift away, which you described so perfectly, away from chains, which enslave us, and we see that in our language around supply systems, and a move to networks and a more kind of ecological metaphor for the way in which food comes onto our plates and how we come by food in a broader system, that we all have those relationships. We can all talk to who's produced it. We can all access the information, but also the economic value of that system. So, Roddy, are you ready? Yeah, of course you can.
I like to move around. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Roddy Hall from 2D Organics. This morning, I had the privilege of feeding my cows at 8 o'clock. My farm is in Kemford, and Chris was actually doing exactly the same thing. The sun was coming up, and the mist was settling over the valley, and I just thought, you know what, this is one beautiful place to work. I look back over my fields of vegetables, and that is what inspires me to do what I love doing. So I'm an organic farmer, and I've got a flagpole. Some of you are listening, well done. It's a big flagpole, actually. It was given to me by somebody, and they said, the reason I've given it to you, Roddy, is because I know you're the only one that will put the flags up. So I started farming in 1997. I'm going to give you a bit of background about myself. I originally, actually, my farming career started when I probably was about 11. I was caught in a field, having made a beautiful house out of straw by a very, very high-rate farmer. My friends ran off, leaving me there. And I just thought, well, I don't really see the problem. It's probably something that I do quite a lot, not see the problem. And I said to him, I'll help you. I'll help you put the bales. Where do you want to put them? And we put them on the trailer. He then shackled me to that farm for 7 years. And I enjoyed it, you know, and I still enjoy it. And I'm lucky. I'm lucky to be in an industry which runs all the way through my body. One thing I will say is that if at any point what I'm about to tell you sounds easy, that's just passion. It's not necessarily always been easy. So I left that farm and did a national diploma in agriculture in Kent. It was agriculture and horticulture, a great course. If anybody is thinking about coming into agriculture, personally, I think the national diploma is an amazing course. I'm sure it doesn't exist anymore, but the equivalent surely will. It was the first time that I found out that I had a brain. To be honest, the school they sent me to said I wasn't particularly academic, and certainly they didn't find any bones in that. But as soon as I started studying something that I was passionate about, it woke something up in my head. And I went from doing the national diploma, I came here to Devon, and did a degree. And much to my parents' amazement, I ended up with a degree in food and agriculture from Silhane. No, the sadness, of course, is it's no longer there, but it was a fantastic college, and it's a great, great shame to me that it's no longer there. Anyway, I'm in danger of losing my way. So, yeah, with those courses, they had middle years, and in the two middle years, the intern years, I spent time on farms, driving sprayers, doing all the things, and working with pigs in interesting conditions. I came away from the whole experience thinking, you know, there must be better ways to farm than this. And And I was right, really. I think, 29 years ago, I was given, and then really, that is why I'm organic, because I just saw quite a lot of things that I just didn't like the look of. And I'm not convinced that the scientists knew what they were doing that time ago. I think there were things that they were producing which were questionable, and I wanted to farm in a different way. That's me, and it's a personal thing. I got the feeling with Sam that it was slightly financial, but with me, if you cut me in half, I'm a stick of rock. It says organic, and I'm passionate about that. I think the organic market is fundamental to my success in agriculture. So I was a new entrant to farming, and in 1997, I was given the opportunity by a close friend of mine to take on his really derelict parents' farm, which in hindsight was quite a challenge. But I was 27 at the time, and I just wanted to farm, and I couldn't see the fact that it didn't have any hedges, it didn't have any fences, it didn't have any water. There was only one farm socket. And I just set out. What I did know was that my grandfather had taught me how to grow things from seed. And seeds are a wonderful thing. You can get a pack of seeds, you lay them out and grow them, and they grow. And then they're bigger. And the Jack and the Beanstalk story really is true. So we took that farm on, and we went through different more phases. We originally I set up a box scheme, which is a fantastic way for anyone to start a farm. It gives you instant cash flow if you can sell it, which fresh vegetables are a relatively simplistic way to sell things. And seeds, as I say, they give you that ability to grow something, and they're not expensive, and you can get cash flow, and you can start farming. The original farm was about 105 acres. I have got slides. I was just keeping them from you. No one's actually said how this works, but thanks very much. One of the things I learned at Suez, they had an interesting game. So we were all put into little different groups, and we were all tasked to sell welly boots. And it was one of the early computer programs. So you remember those screens which were green, and you push buttons really hard, and the computer crunched numbers. So we were all split to 4 teams selling Wellington boots, and the program allowed you to change either the product, the price, the place, or the promotion. Basically, it taught us Eugene McCarthy's 4 Ps, and it really instilled. I just remember thinking it was a great game, and we didn't win, but I mean, it's not important. But it was a really, really interesting game that showed that if you change any one of those things, product, price, place, promotion, it's going to change your business effectiveness. So just with that in mind, so I think I've done that one. So there's your welly boot. This is what I trade under, 2D Organics. The 2D is a machine that was built in 1945. The engine is behind me. It's 12 horsepower. And the hose are in front of you. I sat on that thing for 20-odd years before we got the beautiful machine we've got now. But I have to tell you, it's a fantastic machine. And don't ever underestimate it. So our farm, if you put a line here, look, wholesale vegetables, suckler herd, turkeys, that's our main enterprises. The suckler herd is something I'm particularly proud of. We've got 60 Hereford cows, and we keep all the young stock to about 19, 20 months, whereby we sell them on to Riverford. 2 minutes, on my word. So quick. I put RPA, remove addiction, because obviously we all fill in the forms, but it really concerns me how that money skews all of our holdings. And does it leave us really vulnerable? And I think it does. So my farm revolves around this, and it's the wholesale vegetables. Okay, this is how it works, and this is why I'm able to survive on a very small. We grow 30 acres of organic veg a year on a 5-acre block, 5-year rotation. So we've got 150 acres in total for the vegetables. We have 350 acres for the whole farm, and that's for the cows. The rest of it goes for the cows. The turkeys, are just something we've always done. Again, a wonderful crop. If you can sell a turkey, you can make money from a turkey. So look, all of our vegetables, they go via wholesalers to London, Manchester, Devon. I have fantastic relationships with the wholesalers. I ring them up, tell them what we got 2 or 3 times a week. We change the price. They tell me it's too much. I can't sell it. We put the price up. It's a really, it's a real active process. Yeah. I have to guess how big the market is. So I go to the wholesalers 2 or 3 times a year. I look at how much they're selling. I look at what I can grow. So the product, and it's a really fluid cycle, this, and I'm always challenging it. And then I'm always analysing it. Every month, I look at what we've sold, how much labour we do, and it gives me out a profit or not. The vegetables are profitable. We tend to make about 10% net profit. That's after everything else. There's a lot of work in it. The weakness in the system is still I work too many hours. Anybody got any solutions to that? The next slide, 2 slides I'm going to show you. I hope I've got time for it, because this is my belief. A farm that is dependent on the RPA money and wholly dependent on it will be further away from its market. And it really worries me what's going on now with all of the schemes and all the rest of it, is that if we're not careful, we'll end up with an industry that it hasn't actually got this bit here. And if they change the policy or change, Minette Batters, she mentioned it, that it won't always be the same level. So the final slide is my belief that if we, and I came across this because I was watching Gladiator, and Maximus goes to the Colosseum, and he says, as he goes in there, knowing that he's going to get slayed, that if we all work together, we can live. But if we try and fight on our own, we die. And really, that's what I felt farmers should be thinking like. If we work together, if we pool our resources, if we put some money in, if we find sales and markets, by using that money, we can survive. We have the control. We are taking all the risk. So let's maximize that opportunity. So the final slide, 63,000 holdings. We're one of the largest areas. And average size is very small, 67 hectares. So on your own, it's going to be hard work. But look what happens. If 20% of the people put £1,000 in, that's 12 million quid. If we manage to employ the right people to use that money, we'll have a market forever, and we won't have to rely on them. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roddy. So that's an appeal to crowdfund for a cooperative revolution in the Southwest. We can discuss that later. Well, I think that's a fantastic idea. Ian, do you want to tell us a little bit? I don't know where you want to stand, but tell us a little bit about what you do in your relationships with the farmers you work with and the retailers and restaurants you sell into.
Alrighty. I think I might be the shortest. I'll just tell you what we're about and where we go from there. So I've got no great philosophies. So I'm Ian Warren from Warren's Butchers in Launceston. We're a family business. My wife's our finance director. Dad's a butcher. Mum's an ex-bank clerk, run the office. They're farming now. My sister farms with my brother-in-law and Bob Moore. 90 cows, 3 bulls, and the like. And they are one of our farming network farms, probably one of our bigger ones. And basically, back to the start, I went to university and didn't pay much attention and ended up doing what my dad told me not to do, which was come back. And he challenged me one day, which we laugh about, is how you're going to grow the business. And we had a really busy retail shop in the town, and retail's my heart. So, I don't know, I'd seen them go through the pain of having shops and abattoir, even shares in 2 pubs. And when I came back from failing university, I was like, we need to simplify this. And then Dad said, well, how are you going to grow the business? So I felt that the product, when I say we, our farmers, and not just our farmers actually, our region can produce, deserved a better recognition. So I wanted to take a high-end retail product and try and find a home for it in the top kitchens. And I felt at the time it was weekly served. So, gentleman in the audience over there, he's Launceston lad, had been in London, very passionate about Cornish produce. Obviously, we're on the border, so it's Devon and Cornwall for us. Let's go to London. So we jumped on the train, and the night before I went on the train, I said to talking to my father, I said, I ain't got a clue what to say, Dad. He goes, just tell him, boy, what it says on the tin is what you'll do. So off we went, and it took probably 12 months for us to really start to get anywhere. My staff were looking at me saying, what the hell are we doing? But we persisted. We never dropped quality. We focused on consistency. Managed to get into a couple of really high-profile restaurants, and then after that, the rest was history, really. Shop was still busy. I think we've grown since late 2007, 2008 to a business now where we employ just over 100 people, I think. And part of that has been to grow our farming network, because the whole ethos is about, another thing Dad told me once, he said, make sure you're the best. And he said, if you're best, the profit will look after itself. So that's all we've ever done. We'll focus on the best, and we'll have years where it's good and years where it's not so good, but we must always focus on quality. We must always focus, what I drum into our boys is, you must always make sure the service is first class. Put the customer first, everything right. And so we've really focused on that, and hopefully we've built something that, obviously, it's a business. We want the business to work and be profitable, but also we've got farmers that might keep 4 Herefords a year, or we've got a farmer that might have 150 fit a year. It doesn't matter, as long as your beef, I talk beef because that's what we're renowned for, obviously we're everything, but it doesn't matter as long as that beef is good enough. And we like to think a bit more challenging now with the beef price like it is, but in the past when it was lower, we would go to a farm and pay a premium for the privilege of being able to say, we'll take that one, that one, that one, that one, but that one aren't for us. And we'd do it even with my sister's farm. So we're very selective, focus on quality, and it's just really we've tried to build a route to market for a lot more small farmers. That I'm a real big disliker of our grading system. I think it's encouraged a lot of British beef to be fairly mediocre. I don't want to be controversial, but I still believe the best British beef is some of the best in the world, but our grading system doesn't recognise that. It recognises yield, it does everything wrong. We focus on the quality, and I feel that the cattle that generally is the best is the ones that get penalised in the market. So it's how do we find a home for that beef? How do we find a customer that's willing to pay a little bit more? We're not asking for a fortune, more a little bit more to make that product sustainable, because my biggest concern has been for the last 5-10 years and continues to be, is who's going to be farming this product in 10 or 15 years time? Because Tesco's are the biggest farm shop in the country. Effectively, they're taking from the farm, but who's going to be farming our sort of beef to keep our product unique? And also, when we've got breeding farms on the moor, etc., they can only do so much. Who's going to be providing the route to market for them? So that's what we've worked on all the way through. We think we've done well. We think we've got a good group of farmers that are proud to supply us. Hopefully they feel financially remunerated to an extent. Obviously at the minute, I'm hoping they're a little bit happier than they maybe have been recently. But as a business and for the region, I think we've always tried to do our best. We supply, like I say, restaurants. We've got a strong retail arm. We supply some butchers as well, some great butchers as well. And I'd like to think we played a part in putting our region on the map for what we do, and that's what our aim is to continue to do. And to give you a context, in the National Restaurant Awards this year, we served 6 of the top 10 in the country, all of the top 3. In 2022, we were Britain's best butcher shop. We won that. So, it's all about being the best, and we just want to be able to provide a simple route to market for people that want to join into that, which is, I think, what our bit's for today. So, that's a bit, I think. Roddy?
I think that kind of captures a really interesting kind of dynamic that we often see when we talk about the food system. Is that, well, I am one, and you're one as well, Ian, and we're basically middlemen, and we're the demon often, aren't we? We're the people that are singled out as being the problem in the food system, and obviously that middle person can be massively problematic if they're extractive and if they're not supporting the people that they work with. But actually, that middle person can be a really enabling and facilitating role that can help a farmer reach a market, high quality restaurants in London, that would be incredibly difficult for them to do otherwise. Harriet, let's hear a bit about. Yeah. 8 minutes, but.
Right. Well, actually, that's not too bad, because up until lunchtime I didn't even have a talk. I have most of one now, except for the end. So if it slightly goes fuzzy, it's because I'm still not completely sure what I'm going to say. So yes, my name's Harriet Bell. I am the regenerative farming lead for Riverford Organic Farmers, though nothing gives you imposter system like introducing yourself with that job title in this room. And I very much come at farming originally from the consumer perspective. So I am a Londoner born and raised. And my intro to farming was because I actually went to work in policy and around policy, and I realised that actually the problem with policy is it's largely written and executed and campaigned for by people that have no idea what they're talking about. And therefore, believing that actually our food system is possibly the most important system that we have as a society, I really wanted to understand it from the ground up. And that's what brought me to Devon to work on a farm in kind of 2011. And I've been kind of kicking around ever since. And I think part of the reason I slightly struggle with what to say is because Josiah just said, describe what you do. And I usually say that's faffing around, drinking tea, talking to people and trying to be vaguely useful, which doesn't really sound like a 10-minute talk. But right, I will crack on and give it my best shot. So a quick overview of Riverford, in case anyone's not come across this before. So it started in about 1986 because our founder guy was just really fecked off with dealing with supermarkets. So he thought he'd circumvent them and go direct to consumers with his veg, which he drove around in Devon in a little yellow 2CV, I think originally to about 24 customers. So we now deliver across the whole of England and a bit of Wales. We do about 100,000 boxes-ish a week, so we've got about over £100 million of turnover. And in terms of products, we've diversified, still have our classic veg boxes, still want to keep as much of our veg boxes going as possible because they're what enable us to shift a lot of product that's otherwise sometimes a little bit challenging. Apparently there's only so many leeks that people will voluntarily eat. But we now have meat boxes, dairy, more wholesales kind of coming back into things now, and including sort of dried pulses, flour, etc. And as someone introduced Guy recently, you started out as being radical and now you're unfortunately ubiquitous. And I think that's a pretty good goal for a route to market that is intended to support farmers and get people away from supermarkets, which is how I like to think of Riverford. I like to think of it as the gateway veg box. Like if we can lure them out of, you know, Aldi or Morrison's or whatever and get them into sort of more direct farmer selling, then I kind of hope that they might come out of the other end and buy off a local scheme or a local CSA. Although I will say that hope is slightly at odds with our commercial director's wishes. Apparently you're not supposed to hope that customers move on. So the thing I think I would highlight about the business model of Riverford is that people tend to think it as something that is based around a very charismatic founder, and that is true. But actually what helped Riverford grow is a whole range of models that are about sharing the supply chain differently. So very originally, from the very beginning, when Guy sort of realised that he couldn't grow enough veg himself to meet demand and set about creating the South Devon Organic Producers Co-op, so sort of bringing in more of a cooperative approach to help deliver the diversity of products that meet with customer demand, customer wishes. Then their approach to international expansion, which the original hope had been a sort of series of franchise hubs around the country with a central pack house and distribution point surrounded by a network of organic farmers. It didn't quite pan out that way because we couldn't convince enough people to convert to being organic farmers to have that kind of local cooperative model. But we did use franchisees for kind of national expansion. The introduction of our suppliers charter. So some of you might have come across our Get Fair About Farming, and that's essentially because based on our suppliers charter. So we codified how we work with suppliers and what we believe to be a fairer system than the conventional practices. And it sets out expectations for suppliers, but it also sets out expectations for us and about how we work, including how we pay. But also, I think a really distinguishing feature, which is basically our procurement strategy, which is that we tell you in the autumn what our order is for the year and how much we're going to pay. And it doesn't matter if we don't have enough orders to need that much. If we ask you to grow it for us, we will buy it, because we think that is the fairest way of sharing risk with our suppliers. Not, other than Roddy, I don't think any of our suppliers are in the room, so nobody's here to keep me honest. But I think it works pretty well. The only thing I would say is that maybe the art of good compromise is when everyone's equally unhappy. And then finally, to the kind of most recent transformation of the business, which we're talking about how we share the supply chain, is the fact that the farm succession model, so Guy's farm succession model wasn't to pass it on to a single individual or one of his children or someone else. It was to pass the business on to all employees. So he did quite well out of it, but he probably forewent some profit in order to transition the business into being co-owned by staff. So every member of staff at Riverford is a co-owner of the business, and we have an elected co-owner council who supervise our board of directors, and we have a group of trustees that make sure we continue to operate in line with our founders' wishes. So that's the kind of the structure of the business and how we got to that, I think is fairly unique. In terms of the question Josiah put to me is how, as middle actors, can we offer support that likely wouldn't otherwise be possible for individual businesses? I think what I came up with at lunchtime is that a good middle actor should amplify the best of what your farming system has to offer. And I think at the moment, if you are in a system that doesn't make you feel that way, you are not in a good system. And the best of what your farming system has to offer is a range of things. It includes profit and income and security to you. It includes your farming story. It includes the environmental goods that your farm delivers. It should amplify the best of your farming system. And the one thing I would say quickly is that that includes you as an individual. And not to blow like smoke up all your asses, but I am never not impressed by what farmers bring to the table. And I think it's really obvious at a day like today, like the range of skills, knowledge, the graft that you've put into it. If we think about some of the farming businesses that are in this room, it is incredibly impressive. And your middle actors who are out there in the world representing you to the world should represent the impressiveness that you bring to the table. But having said that, I do think it's okay sometimes to choose to focus your aptitude, your capacity and your inclination, and to not feel like you have to try to do everything yourself. And I know, and I don't know that it's particularly farmers, but sometimes it feels like particularly farmers. Letting go of a bit of control seems to be quite challenging for some of you. But I would suggest that it is well worth it. And in particular, I'd highlight some of Matt's research. He must still be kicking around here somewhere about, oh, you're right there. Hey, Matt. Matt's research about the importance of getting off farm, of setting up a system for you that means that you can get off farm. Because I think that we know that basically physical injury and not asking for help for either physical or mental health issues is damaging. It's damaging for the farming industry, it's damaging for you as an individual, and damaging for the farming industry as a whole, that this is something that farming in particular struggles with. So if you're worried about giving up control to a middle actor, pick the right one, and hopefully it will enable you to kind of lead a healthier and more holistic life that is still bringing value for you. So what is it that middle actors can do? Well, I think the really obvious thing is that we bring in expertise that can support yours. You might not need all of the expertise that a middle actor can offer. If you have a spouse who is a brilliant graphic designer, you don't need a graphic designer to make a great advertising campaign for you. But the range of things that middle actors cover, dealing with and understanding customers, I think can be really quite critical, because if you have like a relatively small customer pool, then yes, it's great. Those one-on-one relationships are amazing. Although I have to say that I still know farmers that would run from a customer if they saw them coming, because just customer service isn't their thing. But I think for us, for example, we have real experts in looking at marketing insights, like future forecasting, where customer trends are going, and enabling us to extract that information and hand that back down the supply chain. Sam talked earlier about the kind of organic cooperative that he works with, saying this is what people want to buy. So we have the expertise to forecast to the future. What are the trends? Where are customers going? And making sure that we can sort of start putting demand for that into the supply chain early, looking at logistics, storytelling. I mean, some people in this room are absolutely amazing at communications, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. I suck on Instagram. Like, I can't take a photo to save my life. Like, but so I would need help with that. And I think it's okay to say, actually, this isn't something that I'm good at naturally. So I would bring in help for storytelling, because it seems like it should be simple, but actually kind of building up a big following online is, it doesn't come naturally for everybody. One of the things that I would flag is education. So educating future consumers. So we've been putting a lot of money recently into a program called Chefs in Schools, which is actually sort of going in and teaching kids now what good food is, what it tastes like, because they're our customers of the future. And I think the advantage of layering on, we also have someone working specifically on AI in farming and like how we use that to make all of our systems more efficient. And I mean, what individual farm has the capacity to hire an AI specialist to do that? And I think what we get from bringing in expertise and layering skills is we get a diversity of thought and we get a diversity of experience, which helps us better understand how to reach where most consumers are. And overall, it makes our system more resilient, but it also increases the value of what that system delivers. And it increases it both financially in terms of income, but it also increases our ability to adapt to the future. And the main value it delivers is time. So bringing in outside expertise and you not having to do everything frees up your time to, if you're not doing, somebody said earlier, if you're not doing something in the tractor, you have more time to sort of focus on how to make your system better. But you also get the value of the time of the experts you brought in to kind of think strategically into the future. And as Josiah pointed out, in terms of the financial income value, if that's not being extracted from the middle operator sort of system and handed off to shareholders, you have an aggregate value from the work of all those farmers and all those experts that you can reinvest into the system. So just to give you some example, we reinvest that in our supply chain in terms of capital costs. So where there's no government subsidy available for something, we'll often front capital to buy equipment that helps farmers diversify what products they're making, or to plant walnut trees, which Guy's quite enthusiastic about, and which we did before the SFI grant came into being. We also fund capital into trials to support on-farm innovation. So where a farmer's cash flow might restrict their ability to kind of put capital investment into trying something different, we'll have the capacity to kind of come in and help them with that. And that capital investment in R&D, I think, is what really help us move farming as a whole forward. So we can fund the trial of things that can then be used as evidence to change policy, which changes the whole system for the better and makes it possible for other farmers to then get the grant funding to do the same things that we've been paying our farmers to trial. Was that too convoluted a sentence? That sort of mostly makes sense. Okay, you're following me. Good. Like the other thing we do is we commission research. So at the moment we're doing a piece of research on kind of peat alternatives. That is a big problem in the horticulture supply chain. It's not necessarily something an individual farmer would feel that they could tackle, setting aside Tollyhurst Organics. But certainly it's not something that farmers might feel they could tackle, the change of the system at scale. So that would be the kind of project that a middle actor would take on. We also take on fights. Like we will take on fights that you as a farmer might want to have, but not necessarily have the resource to fund yourself or know how to go about it. Thinking about, I won't specify it, but a conversation that Josiah and I were having yesterday about a particular pot that needs stirring. Like you as a farmer might not have the resource to put the ingredients in the pot or to pay someone to do the stirring, but a middle actor might potentially have the resource to do that for you. And it might be something that challenges the food system and tries to make it fairer. It might be something that challenges problematic policy. But the power that you all represent as individuals, a middle actor has the opportunity to kind of aggregate that to make the case for you. We also can fund failure. And I know that seems like a really odd thing to say, but I think failure is a really critical part of learning and advancement. And I think when you're working on really tight margins, which a lot of farmers are, it's not something you want in your, I mean, it happens, like crop failure happens. We've heard multiple examples of it today, but it's not necessarily something you want to invite. And yet failure is a really critical part of research and development and of pioneering new models. And I know it's a finger, but I didn't put my glasses on, so I don't know how many fingers it is, Mel. Just the one. Okay, and the right way around. I personally think that that's a really important part of adding value, because it's something that government would penalise you for. Like, we've heard this morning about how uncertain the future is and how uncertain the environment is, and you know, is it going to be really hot or is it going to be really cold based on what AMOC does? If it's, you know, really hot, some crops will make it and some crops won't. So we need to be prepared for sort of failure as a result of things completely outside of farmers' control. Now, government will penalise you if you do a government action and it doesn't work. They won't necessarily recognise that it doesn't work as a result of a force majeure event. So I think it's really important that we can fund farmers to try things that might fail. It's just the future of innovation. And the one thing that I will touch on in my final minute is that there was a report that came out today from Tim Lang looking at the National Preparedness Commission's report on how well suited our food system is for the future. And I'm sure, to the surprise of none of you, the answer is not very much. It's not particularly resilient for the future. And I think it raises a really interesting question about the role that middle actors can play going forward to bring more resilience in, because basically we need to find a cost-effective way of introducing more redundancy into the system so we can have more risk and more failure in the future and survive it. And I think that's probably going to be the challenge for middle actors going forward, is how do we do that well? Okay.
I think that risk sharing bit is really, really key. I mean, we as a business do that where we're working with lentils, which are a really uncertain crop. We price them in assuming a 1 in 4 year failure. So the farmers are getting a premium so that when they do fail, they've still got confidence to grow them in the next year. And I think taking risks like that is something that we can do that's very hard for an individual farmer to do in the same way. And I've just realised that as a chair on a panel like this, I can ask the horrible questions that usually I. So I've got a horrible question, and then we'll see if there are any from the audience. We haven't got very long. But so my question is really, it's about scale. And I think within the organic sector, we often see Riverford as being this massive, this behemoth, this huge business. But actually, there's probably a Tesco on the edge of Exeter that's turning over about the same amount of money. It's a drop in the ocean, and yet it seems really, really huge, and that's a massive problem. And we as a business, as Hodmedod, working in the arable sector, we're very much aware of the huge area of arable land in the UK in any given year that is largely managed disastrously, and the need, given the context we were given at the beginning of the session, to change that really quite quickly and urgently. And so my question really would be, for all of the panel, is how do we scale out? I'm not actually suggesting you scale up, because I think that's the mistake that we made previously. How do we scale out? How do we nurture more businesses to do the same things that you're all doing? And how do we make that happen? Anyone wants to dip in on that?
I'm not sure the mechanism by which we do it, but I have a sense of, or I believe, something that enables us to behave in that way, because you're asking us to behave differently. It's this kind of innate economic reality within which we operate, where we have to protect and compete and be the best. And actually, I think what we've found in the network, there is certainly tension and conflict sometimes, but when you have a business relationship that is based around friendships, and that's largely where you get to when you have a relationship with someone, is ultimately a friendship, then the temptation to be reductive about things like price or availability or convenience is less. So what I'm saying is that relationships are really critical in order for us to kind of sidestep that and enter a kind of new economy, certainly in the grain world.
Yeah, Harriet, did you want to?
Yes, I mean, the only thing I was going to say is I don't think businesses should aim to replicate what we're doing. I think diversity and food resilience of the future is the same. It's like it's like the YQE. It's like you have as many different models and as many different structures as you can, and that's the best possible way we can ensure against points of failure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm not very good at listening, so I'll just check
Don't
in.
tell me that.
I think that It's really, really important that we work together. If you think of it, if you're a buyer, you want a simple solution. For things being brought to you, you want a simple solution. So if people come together and work together and are confident of what they've got to sell and at what price, and they do it collectively, it's very likely to make the buyer's job much easier. You either create your new market or you work with an existing buyer and make his job simpler.
Yep. Yeah, no, I can see that. Ian, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. So, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you're competing into London into quite a competitive space, and
Yeah, although is that working?
Try this one.
Yeah, that's it. It is, but in our thing, there isn't enough to go around. You know, when you're dealing in a quality product, it's not plentiful, so there's not enough to go around. So I think you can work together with people, and I think you need to. Like for us, for our chain, you know, a big part of our thing has always been to sell more meat of the quality for our, you know, where we are is very limited on what you can farm, especially on Bodmin Moor, and you know, we're in between Bodmin Moor and Dartmoor. So you need to try and find change. I mean, I see Abby sat there. You know, we work with Pipers. You know, they're looking for. They've got such a great business, and they're looking for more cattle of our sort. So we work together. We can work together on balance like that. So I think if you find like-minded people, you can have good relationships. I think there's not enough. We're deemed with a limited supply.
absolutely. And I think sometimes we see each other as competition when really the competition is the existing system, and we need to focus on that and the change that needs to happen there, rather than on little tiny battles between ourselves that are, you know, largely irrelevant. Question here, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the question that Ian raised about who's going to be supplying you guys in 10 years' time. So it can be really quick, one-sentence answer. What do the panel, perhaps including Josiah, think is going to differentiate the perhaps smaller farmers that will be thriving and supplying what you guys need in 10 years' time?
Well, I think you just got to go quality. For me, the future's quality. Mass-produced will come in, but you just got to be quality. Anybody that sticks to quality, it's been hard. It's been hard for the last 5 years. From my brother-in-law, he's on depression, but you know, hopefully you'll see the end of it. But yeah, stick to quality, and like I say, it's not enough to go around. And it's starting now. You're seeing it starting now. I can't see it going backwards. So I think
my kind of reading of what Ian said was actually really reflecting of my area. If you'd have let's drop us now to the middle of the farm, and then we just do a 360, and I could probably name about 8 or 10 family farms similar size to us, maybe a little bit bigger, 200 to 400 acres in the early 2000s. Fast forward to now, on one side we have an AD plant, on the other side we have a big dairy, between them covering 20 to 30,000 acres of our county. So, I mean, this is the context of who's going to be supplying in 10 years. If we stick within the parameters of the current system, it's consolidation, unification, and like homogeneity of product. And what we're trying to do is change the rules and reimagine the food economy that we're involved in, and that will mean that the same people can supply in 10 years' time. They're supplying now, and hopefully other versions of Ian and other versions of Hodmedods and other networks like the Grain Network all over the country.
I'm going to say, so the future of a small farm is to grow vegetables. We're less than 50% self-sufficient in this country for vegetables, and it's grown on less than 1% of the farmable ground. If you look at the country as a whole, every single town used to have a vegetable area that was grown for the town. Those have largely been built on now, but the land's still there. We're still capable of growing it. So if you're a young person coming into it, as I tried to sort of point out, is that you can buy a pack of seeds. They're not enormously expensive. You can grow them, and they do this thing quite quickly. And then you can integrate all the other bits of a farm into that system, because you'll need all the other bits. So I think there's a massive opportunity in this country. We're only 60%. Allegedly in all things. You've got to find a market, but you can create one, especially if there's a demand.
I think we really will have to. Are you going to give me 1 minute? I mean, one more question. Okay, great. That is fantastic. Right over there, seaweed guy.
You're a bunch of farmers coming together. How do you agree a price for a crop? I might be coming in quite naively, but if you've all got different overheads, how do you work together to get those agreeable prices so you're all happy?
I mean, that's a heck of a question to end on. And I don't know if we've necessarily got time to properly explore that, because it'll be different for all of us in very different ways. I can speak for Hodmedod, which is that we work individually with farmers, and they're often working at larger scale than perhaps Roddy might be working at, or even Fred in some cases, to understand what the cost of production is. And often we'll pay farmers different prices to reflect that the risks that they're taking and what their system needs and the support that they need. And then we come up with an aggregate price, an overall price, which matches all of those things. Farmers are very different in the way that they operate, their fixed costs, the variable costs every year. So it is quite a considered process for us. I'm going to hold the microphone because I want to keep control. But there's 3 down there if anyone wants to.
I think you're picking up on the fact if farmers work collectively together and create a market and have the vision for sales, I mean, once we get to that point, we're in a massively different position than we are now. And I think then you can focus in on price. I mean, price is obviously vitally important. But I think it would have to be some sort of standardisation, but it would be a greater price than what you're getting now.
How do Riverfords deal with this?
That's not my job, thankfully. I mean, I think I would touch maybe on something that crosses over both succession and price. So we do a pretty similar approach to Hodmedod's in terms of price. We're aware of other prices that operate outside us, but we basically sit down with our growers every year and say, what is it going to cost you to meet this program, and try and just figure out between us what a fair price is that covers them. We can get a bit caught out by, like, if there are massive price rises in the kind of the main market of, like, lamb suddenly peaks or something like that, it can catch us out. I guess we try and offer more stability than maybe what people get in the market. And I think maybe this touches on the succession question for us as well. So, and who's going to be growing our veg in the next 10 years? So we've currently been risk assessing our whole supply chain, looking at, like, both what succession is within the farm systems, but also, like, how are people being affected by, by changes in insurance, by increased weather events, by anything that makes their production look less stable. And we don't have an answer for this yet, but our question for us is, in the next 10 years, is how do we step in and help more than we have done through that process of uncertainty, in order to ensure that there are still farmers that want to grow for us and have the capacity to grow for us in 10 years' time. Not only that, we also want to grow as a business. And so we need to go out and find more people. If anyone farms, I mean, this is Devon Conference, but anyone else down in Cornwall, we're after some Cornish growers.
Ian, how do you work that balance with the farmers? You've got a ceiling price, I guess, for a lot of the products that you're selling?
No, well, ours we need to run in line with, understand the trade, you run in line with the market price, and we sit like a cushion above the market price. Where we don't come in like Superman with a cape and go, yeah, we're going to give you X amount more. Where we would benefit the farmer is, like I said, we're looking for the best. Generally, the best won't fit the high yielding animal that the big processors want. I wouldn't want them in my fridge for a gift, and they're getting a premium for it. We actually want the ones that don't, which get penalised by the grid. So that's when we would step in, and that's when the protection for the farmer goes up. So it is a sliding scale. If you get a little fat O+4 HFers, we're going to have to help you up a lot more than if you've got some smarter cattle. So we sit above the market and jump in extra where we got to.
Brilliant. Fred, have you got a reflection on that?
Yeah, just an anecdote about what really started me on this journey to kind of thinking about the economy that surrounded the farm was a conversation between Ian and a guy called Ben in London, who has subsequently opened 4 or 5 different restaurants. And Ian introduced me to Ben, and before he'd opened the restaurant, he said, I'm going to open this restaurant, and we want to buy pigs. So can you tell me, like, how many pigs you need us to buy, and can you tell me what price we need to pay? And I am not exaggerating, that was the conversation. And as a farmer, I mean, the concept of a problem around what price we get I'd love it. What a great problem to have. What price do we need? I mean, farmers don't set their own price. I mean, this is the fundamental crux of what we're discussing here. It's like there's a parameter around behavior and empowerment of what you can and can't do on farm, because we operate in this global system that's dependent on Chicago Stock Exchange. So that conversation just really brought it home to me. I was like, well, I don't know. And then I started, when you approach an alternative route to market with that framework and that kind of supportive supply chain with Ian and me supporting the restaurant and me to connect, you can actually start with a blank sheet of paper and say, okay, what does regenerative farming look like for me, and I'll do whatever I want, and then you just price it in, and it's an authentic, compelling story.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. I think the key takeaway here is if you pay farmers a fair price, they'll do what you need them to do, and they'll enjoy growing those crops. And we certainly find there's no shortage of potential supply if the price is right. The question is about demand, and we all eat, and we all have to start shaping demand. We all have to, if we have the economic power in the system to make choices that affect change, we should use that power. And I think that is the thing that transforms farms, and it transforms food systems. We need to use the power that we already have in our hands to make that happen. So thank you so much, Fred, Roddy, Ian, and Harriet. That's a really interesting conversation. I hope everyone's enjoyed it, and thank you.
Can you hear me? Thank you. I'm the tail end Charlie, so apologies. Today, it's going to be difficult to summarise everything we've heard, so I'm not even going to try. We've had insights from farmers on the front line, and we've witnessed the resurgence of life in their fields, the increased resilience on their farms, and the improved livelihoods in their families. And these aren't just isolated incidents. They're beacons of hope, and they're demonstrations of the tangible impact of such practices. We've also dipped into the science. We've seen the successes and acknowledged the challenges, and there are challenges for sure. But most importantly, we've discovered a shared understanding that regenerative agriculture, or smart farming, some people don't like calling it regenerative, isn't just a trend, it's an absolute necessity. It's not about producing food, it's about regenerating ecosystems, revitalizing communities, and nourishing future generations. It's about recognizing the profound interconnectedness between the health of our soil, the health of our planet, and the health of our communities. And we started this morning with some levity from building back beavers and naughty laptops and walnut-fattened grey squirrels, which might be a new product line for Witherford, if this is anything to go by. But then it became really sobering. You know, that the extremes we're going to face, it's not if, it's when. That we need dynamic alignment, not just in policy, but actually in practice, especially when we consider trade deals or even land use. And that planting trees is easy, however, being in it for the long term is hard. And then when we considered the livestock systems, that attention to detail is key to focusing in on the win-wins rather than the win-loses, to decide where you're going to invest your time and money, and to put down complex routes and to keep the livestock moving. In Arable, we heard from a bunch of fanatics, some of whom are newly minted. They encouraged us to get nerdy and into fungi, to cherish our soil, and that if we're going to bend the rules to do it better, to do it at the right time and with the right kit. And then, with a view to a fairer share, we're actually being encouraged to change the rules. You know, this is a game changer. To think like Maximus, to build strong relationships with shared values, to have compelling stories, to make our own food ecosystems, layering skills, facilities, equipment, bringing in middle actors, and getting us the time to get out of the farm and into our own heads. So, if my first vote of thanks is to thank all of our speakers and chairs, it's been a pleasure to geek out with you today. Really has. So, audience, please. So, as we step into February, the journey doesn't end here. I think it's fair to say it is just the beginning. Forgive the analogy, the metaphors, but the seeds of change have been sown, and now we must nurture them. We need to cultivate them, we need to ensure that they flourish. Rootstock is on this journey. I don't know the exact numbers, but if I really round them up, the first year it was over 100, the second it was over 200, and today it's over 300. From maybe using a bit of a tree parlance, from plug to whip to maiden, it's a great success. None of this would have been possible without the team at the Devon County Agricultural Association, especially Mel Bradley. Mel, thank you so much. And let's not forget Lisa and her team, and Poshnosh as well. Thank you for feeding us. So maybe we have an opportunity now, as we step into February, to leave here truly inspired with those seeds of knowledge and a network to start putting these principles into action. Please, I urge you, let us commit to sharing our knowledge. You know, let's be ambassadors for this regenerative, smart agriculture. Let's share our experiences and inspire others. Let's commit to supporting our farmers. Let's champion the policies and initiatives that empower them to adopt such practices. Let's commit to demanding change. Let's use our voices as consumers and voters to advocate for food systems that prioritise soil health, biodiversity and community well-being, and healthy food. Let's collaborate and innovate, continue to work together, sharing research, developing new technologies, and thoroughly getting nerdy. The challenges we face are significant, but they're not insurmountable. And I believe that working together, we can embrace innovation, we can stay true to the principles of regeneration, we can create a food system that is resilient, sustainable, fair, and thriving. Let's leave this conference with a sense of renewed purpose. I certainly have. Let's have that shared vision, think like Maximus, and commit to action. Let's be the future generation that regenerates our planet, one farm, one field, and one community at a time. And my final vote of thanks is to you as an audience, fellow cultivators of change. Thank you. I think there might be one last thing I've been requested and urged to you to do, is to fill in the feedback forms so we can better design next year's event as well. Thank you.